Thank you, Susan. Okay, we are on to our second break. Before we do that, a thank you to Gibby's Wine Bar and Market on Randall Road in Geneva for sponsoring our refreshments. Check out gibbys-wine.com for their very own special events where you can enjoy a glass of wine or beer or a tasting paired with something from their Small Bites menu, all in the midst of a wine shop with live music and featured artists. And visit GIBBYS-wine. I'm not going to spell that. Our next writer, Donald J. Bingle, has published 3 novels, more than 40 short stories in science fiction, fantasy, thriller, horror, steampunk, yay, I like steampunk, romance and comedy genres, as well as the award-winning short humorous memoir, Father's Day. Tree of Enlightenment is the 3rd story in his Father's Day Deluxe 3-pack edition, available on Amazon for Kindles, iPads, PCs, and smartphones. Welcome, Don.
I will confess to you that the first story in that 3-pack is the best story, but I can't make my way through it in public anymore. So we're going with the 3rd story, and we're going to hope it works. This story is called Tree of Enlightenment. When a boy is growing up, there eventually comes a time when he realizes that his father is not infallible, that he needs to make his own decisions in life, that bad stuff can happen to good people, that actions have consequences, and that he has to live with the consequences of his own decisions. Most often, these realizations don't all occur on the same day, at the same moment. Only rarely do they involve a running chainsaw. During my junior and high school days, my family lived in the woods. In fact, I helped my dad clear trees for where the house would be built. My dad, having paid a premium price for a heavily wooded 3-acre lot, was not about to cut down any more trees than absolutely essential for construction. Consequently, a number of big leafy trees stood right near the house, especially near the back, where a concrete patio and A-frame doghouse were the only things between our familial dwelling and the wilds. The cycle of life being what it is, some trees do better than others. Branches die and drop off. Entire trees fall in the forest whether there is anyone to hear them or not. And so it came to pass that a very large branch from one of the trees nearest to the back of the house stopped leafing and turned dark, except where bark fell off to expose the dead white wood beneath. Normally, not a problem. The property had a number of dead trees. Some fall into the forest floor. My dad did nothing about these trees. We lived in the woods, not some landscape designed, prettified suburban version of the woods. The only thing Dad did to the acreage away from the house was to venture into it on his ancient riding lawnmower, cutting paths for people to stroll along. Hardly anyone actually walked these paths, and the detritus of the woods did a number on the riding lawnmower, breaking off lawnmower blade after lawnmower blade until my dad got tired of paying for new blades and installed rubber ones. In this particular instance, however, a dead tree branch loomed over the roof of the house. More specifically, over the master bedroom of the house. Even more specifically, over the bed in the master bedroom of the house. Most specifically, over where my mom slept. My mom became convinced that the dead branch was going to break off, somehow crash through the sturdy roof, the architectural beams holding up the roof, and the ceiling, also known as the attic floor, and fall upon her in her sleep, killing her. This made her anxious and interfered with her sleep. Whether this was because the fear of killer tree branches kept her from falling asleep, or because she lay awake on breezy or stormy nights waiting to dodge out of the way, I never knew. Teenage kids really don't ask about such things. Lesson 1, parents and spouses are not always rational. In any event, the law came down one Saturday morning. My mother would no longer sleep in fear for her life. My dad had to cut down the offending branch. My mom left to go shopping, leaving Dad and me to take care of the chore. My siblings weren't around to help, though I don't remember why. Lesson 2, love means your wife is always right. Certainly, my wife is always right. Dad dutifully got out the chainsaw and gassed and oiled it up, then carried it from the garage to the patio. Next, he went to the side of the house where he kept the largest, longest aluminum extension ladder we had. We each grabbed an end and walked it into the backyard. We extended it its full length, planted the feet firmly in the soil, parallel to the branch, about 6 or so feet back, then walked it upright. The ladder was too short to reach the branch. We moved the bottom a bit closer to the branch and tried again, still short. This did not deter my father. Once my dad started a project, he didn't stop until it was done. In fact, he rarely would even go to the hardware store for supplies until it was done. If he didn't have the right tool or the correct doohickey to go forward, he would somehow jimmy things so whatever he did have on hand would work. My dad didn't like to do a project twice, when once would work. Maybe that's why he put up Christmas lights in 1968 and never took them down. After all, they really weren't that visible when they weren't turned on unless you happened to be looking at the roof line. I have to say that I'm my father's son on these things. We have outdoor spotlights at our house we never use except for the holidays. They have red and green bulbs in them year-round. And the nails used to hold the garland around the front door and even inside along the windows overlooking the backyard are permanent, making Christmas decorating an easier task. Lesson 3. Doing something in a way that involves the least possible work is not laziness, it's efficiency. Really. Lesson 4. Sticking with the job until it's done, even if stopping to get a part or a better tool would make it easier, isn't stubbornness. It's a strong work ethic. Sure. All of this explains why, when the ladder came up short, my dad didn't hire a tree service or go get a bigger ladder. No, my dad stuck to it. Instead, he went around to the front yard, got into our big old blue station wagon, one that had replaced our little white Rambler years before, and drove it to the backyard, positioning the car perpendicular to the offending branch, a bit forward of where we had placed the ladder on earlier attempts. Then he opened up the tailgate of the station wagon, and we lifted the ladder up, setting the feet in the crack between the tailgate and the back of the car. So the ladder was now 18 or so inches off the ground. Then we re-extended the ladder and leaned it toward the tree, aiming for the stout part of the offending branch near the trunk. The ladder now reached, with the legs of the fully extended ladder clearing the midpoint of the sizable branch by 6 or 8 inches. Now, before I go any farther in this story, let me disabuse you of any misconceptions. The branch, even dead, was thick and solid and clearly stout enough to support the ladder and my dad. And my dad had cleverly placed the car angled as far toward the trunk of the tree as possible. So most of the station wagon was to the left of the tree, while he would be cutting off the branch to the right of the ladder on the right side of the tree. So the branch wasn't about to fall on the car. My dad seemed convinced it wasn't going to damage the house either, though whether this was because it really didn't overhang the house as much as my mom thought, or because he knew the bending of the branch before the cut was final would mean only insubstantial twigs would scrape down and off the roof before the full weight of the branch gave way, I don't recall. I just know that he was confident that everything was carefully planned and under control, or so he thought. Having set up the ladder, my dad got the chainsaw, started it after a few pulls, revved it, squirting oil on the chain to make sure it was running smoothly. Then, with the idling chainsaw in his right hand, he turned to me and asked me to hold the ladder while he climbed it to cut off my mother's branch of death. I stood to my dad's left and leaned over the tailgate to grab the left side of the ladder as he stood ready to clamber up onto the tailgate and onto the ladder from the right. I glanced up. The ladder still cleared the branch by 6 or 8 inches. My dad stepped on the tailgate, and the car's old suspension system gave ground with a creak as the tired springs compressed. Now the ladder cleared the branch by 4 inches, 5 tops. I watched as my dad continued up the ladder, grasping the aluminum rungs one by one with his left hand as he ascended, his right hand still holding the idling chainsaw. The ladder slid a bit up and down as the springs gave and took weight, but nothing too precipitous as he climbed. Finally, he got to the top, leaned into the ladder as much as possible, and put both hands on the chainsaw as far right of the ladder as he could comfortably get, which wasn't far. He revved the chainsaw and began to cut. Now, I don't know if you've ever used a chainsaw, but the best approach to cutting something large is to push hard, then ease up, then push hard in a regular rhythm. This keeps the chain from slowing under constant pressure, shortening your cutting time, and keeping the chain from binding. The thing is, as my dad pressed, then eased off, then pressed again, I saw the ladder begin to slide up and down the branch. The car tailgate was bouncing due to the give of the car's tired springs as Dad, in essence, took weight off the ladder when pushing down on the saw, then added it back as he eased up. The 4 to 5 inch clearance kept shifting about. 5, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. I tried to yell to my dad to be careful, that the ladder was shifting, but I couldn't be heard over a running chainsaw inches from his ear. And my dad is afraid of heights, so there was no chance he was ever going to look down. He never heard me. I never had a chance to wave him off. There was nothing I could do. No one was home. There weren't such things as cell phones. I had no other option but to hold the ladder and either stare at the empty cargo space in front of me in the station wagon or watch my dad at the top of the ladder. So I watched the ladder. 3, 2, 1, 2, 1. And that's when enlightenment struck me, and I learned all the other lessons a son needs to know to become a man. This clever idea to extend the reach of the extension ladder wasn't so clever after all. Not replacing the worn springs on the car wasn't entirely wise either. Something terrible was about to happen, and there was nothing at all in my power I could do to stop it. If that ladder slipped beneath the edge of the branch as my dad eased up from cutting, or had to yank upward to loose the chainsaw as the partially cut and bending branch began to bind the blade, very bad things would happen. I couldn't hold the ladder in place if it started to slip. I couldn't catch my father or break his fall. I had no interest in getting anywhere near a descending chainsaw, whether or not the chain was still spinning as it tumbled from on high. I wanted to live to see another day. And if I did die that day, I didn't want to die from stupidity. And trying to catch an adult male revving a running chainsaw struck me as pretty stupid. So I looked in front of me and I made a decision. If things went bad, if the ladder slipped and my dad started to fall, I decided to fling myself into the cargo area in the back of the station wagon and let gravity take its course. The back of the station wagon would protect me from falling objects, whether my plummeting dad, the dismembered tree branch, or the slashing blades of a chainsaw. It was the only safe place. It was the smart thing to do. 2121 less. Then it happened. The branch fell with a thud next to the car, and my dad let up on the throttle of the chainsaw. The ladder's rhythmic bouncing settled down. 2, 3, 4. No one fell. No one died. When he was safely back down on the ground, I told my dad about the ladder clearance problem and how I tried to yell, but he didn't hear. But I didn't tell them that if he started to fall, I'd decided to jump into the open back of the station wagon and save myself. There was no good reason to tell him that. To tell him that I had grown up in those few terrifying minutes into someone willing to make hard decisions and live with the consequences, even if he might not have lived with the consequences. No one fell, no one died, but I can't say no one was traumatized. Growing up is traumatic. Growing up fast with a running chainsaw looming above you leaves an invisible scar. If the roles had been reversed and the ladder had slipped, I have little doubt my dad would have tried to catch me, running chainsaw or no. Parents do amazing, unbelievable things for their kids. Some days, I wish I could be that kind of person, but then the rational, logical, empirical part of my personality reasserts itself, and I know that I am not. I also understand what people mean when, after such situations, they say they reacted by instinct, because there's just no logic in love or heroics, especially when part of the equation is a falling chainsaw. Heck, I flinch away from even using the things. Sorry, Dad.